Good morning and welcome to Cash is Clear Live. It's good to be here, whether you are here live with me or you're watching or recording. Either way, it's going to be an interesting discussion today. I will be talking to you about pricing and about products and about margins. And did you ever wonder why at the movie theater? I love going to the movies. Hopefully you do too, but if not, that's okay. Maybe one of the reasons you don't like going is because how expensive popcorn is. But did you ever notice that the popcorn that's the small is barely less expensive than the large? Well, that's what we're going to be talking about today, is how you can look at product pricing from the standpoint of value, not cost plus, which is the way we so often think about these things. What does it cost? Do a markup. We're going to be looking at things differently. And I'll be giving you a real life example from one of my clients. And I'm looking forward to talking to you about that. But first, I'd like to thank Pivot 2026, the Unconventional Cash Flow Conference. They are sponsoring our show today. And the Pivot website is now live. You can go to pivot2026.com, learn all about it. And I'll look forward to talking to you. It's one of the shows I'll be talking all about Pivot and why it's an unconventional conference. And I'm hoping to see you there. So back to value-based pricing. So let me tell you about a client I was working with. They had a really interesting problem. They were selling everything that they could. They were selling everything the factory made. The factory is running 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, and could not make any more product. Yes, they were planning on bringing on more machinery, but it was fairly complex machinery and fairly skilled operators that if the operators weren't operating right, you get high failure rates. The product costs would go out through the roof because you'd have a lot of failures. So that was the situation with the production. They were selling as much as they could, and revenue was flat, and margins were going down. Well, there's a lot of reasons it was happening. I'll talk to you about some of the other ones on a different show. But today we're going to be talking about pricing because they sold 3 sizes. They sell 3, they actually sold 4. Gas cans. They were gasoline cans. You know, the ones you fill up that you put gas in for your lawnmower or for whatever reason you bring it along with you so you have extra gasoline in your boat or in your RV or whatever it is. And they made 4 sizes: a gallon, gallon and a half, 2 gallon, and 3 gallon. I'm pretty sure those were the sizes. And we sat down and said, okay, let's look at the pricing. And as I looked at it, I said, wow, this is really interesting because the gallon can, I'm making up numbers now because I don't remember what they are. That was 10 years ago, but it's still relevant. Let's say it was $10 for a 1 gallon gas can. And then the 1.5 gallon gas can would be $12 and $14 for the 2 gallon gas can. And it was, let's call it $16, 1.5, 2 for the 3 gallon gas can. And I sat and asked, well, why? You've got a 1 gallon gas can that the 3 gallon gas can costs 60% more, that's it, but yet you're getting 300% more volume. Why are you doing it like this? And the answer came back very simply. We use a cost plus model, and it only costs a fraction of amount more in materials to make these because they were plastic and you had molds. You could only use so many molds at a time, but it didn't really take any longer to produce a small gas can than a large one. So you didn't have any more time for the person who's working at it, and you didn't reduce machine capacity by producing the large ones. And so it's like, guys, we can look at this a different way. When we provide significant additional value, it has nothing to do with cost. What it has to do with is perceived value in the minds of the consumer and how much more it is worth to go get the additional value, which in this case was more gasoline that they could tow with them. So what does this have to do with popcorn in a movie theater? Well, when you go to get popcorn in a movie theater, what do you think it costs? I don't know, but I pop popcorn at home and it's cheap. It's like 25 cents for the popcorn itself. And maybe you have to put it into a bag or to a bucket, you're adding another 50 cents. And so if you get a small versus a large, maybe the price goes from 25 cents worth of popcorn to 50 cents worth of popcorn. I doubt it's that much. And let's call it $1 for a large and 50 cents for a small. But when you go buy them at the supermarket, it's $4 for a small, $4.50 for a medium, and $5 for a large. Well, I've just told you that there's hardly any price difference between the cost of producing a small and a large. And so why do people buy the large? It's because it's a better value. Now, that's a whole different discussion. But the point here is it's not a cost plus pricing. If that was the case, you would barely have any kind of, well, it would be very small. You wouldn't necessarily pay less. But the point is they're doing it to get you to buy the large ones. In the case of my client, I was saying, listen, I understand that that's the way you've done it in the past, but let's take a look at it this way. Wouldn't you rather sell more large containers? Why? Because there's more total gross margin. And in order to do that, you should, instead of looking at the small containers as the start point and adding as the starting point, let's go with the large container and what that should be worth on the market. And we went out and looked at competitors, and lo and behold, the large containers were significantly more expensive than we were selling them at. So we said, let's start with that as the core price point and then scale downwards from there. And when we did that, all of a sudden the margin of the large one went way up. And then we said, but we want people to spend all that money, so we're not going to reduce the other ones very much. We ended up doing a price shift for everything. Again, they were selling as much as they could. So it wasn't like they were they had demand in the marketplace. They were in control. They didn't ship to clients that were too small because they just couldn't, which is another story we'll shift for another day of your distribution channels can impact your margins. And so we ratcheted up that price of that large gas can and then said, let's try to see where we position the smaller ones. So people are sort of pushed, just like the popcorn. You only spend $1 more to get 3 times as much popcorn. We did the same thing with the gas cans where we brought it down. So we actually left the small gas can price alone because that was an entry-level price point, but we ratcheted up the other two and it became very attractive. So what's the point here? Margins. What is left over after you pay for products, and that's where you generate the cash to pay for expenses. And if you don't charge enough, you won't have the money left over to pay for your expenses, let alone have a profit. And so when people are looking for root cause of why there's no money in the bank, even though there's a reasonable profit or reasonable profit margins, that's one of the places I look is what can we do to the profit margins to increase just a little bit by lowering cost or increasing price. And here's the key factor to remember. If you're interested in profit and you only have a 5% profit margin, at the end of the day, net, that's all that's left over. You sell $100, there's $5 left over after you spend all your money for your cost of goods sold and for your expenses, $5 left over. If you can raise just $5, that price, 5%, you've got 5% on the bottom line. You've added another 5% to the bottom line, which is now 10%. But that's 2 times as much as you had before. So it's a 100% increase. That's the amazing thing about trying to work with gross margins, or lowering your costs is another way to do it. We'll leave that for another day about how you can do that. But if you can do incremental increases in your product line mix to try to sell your higher margin products, that's what this is all about, selling higher margin products, adjusting your prices, then it can drop straight to the bottom line. And it is amazing the impact it will have on profitability. But as you know, we're all about the cash. You will have so much more cash left over because it's all what I call free money. So that's a key point. All right, so that was topic number 1 for today. If you have comments, please let me know if you're live. And if you're not live and you're watching this on YouTube or on LinkedIn, leave a comment, ask a question, and I'll get back to you. I'll get notified if there's questions or comments. All right, so what's number 2 on this journey to becoming more profitable and having more cash in the bank? The second one is about hidden costs. And the first part was hidden margins, or the absence of margins. Let's talk about hidden costs. So and I'll tell you the name of this company. It was Kodak. Most people know Kodak, even though it's not so much a household name now, especially to younger people, because they had significant financial issues, which maybe I'll talk about sometime in the show. But I won't today. What I'm going to talk about is when I took over the imaging division of Kodak Latin America. It was business imaging, actually. We did scanners, microfilm, microfiche, all the stuff that had to do with images. High cost products. Nobody knew that we existed unless you're in the imaging industry. Then we were really well known. So I took over Iomega Latin America. No, I'm sorry. I did that also, but I'm talking about Kodak. So Kodak Latin America, we were selling everything to everyone. Now, if you've ever noticed on the map, Latin America is a huge area, and it's got, I think there's 30 countries when you include, it was Latin America and the Caribbean. So it was a huge number of countries, and we sold everything to everybody in every country. And that was the opinion of my predecessor. He was focused on selling, and I was focused on making a profit. Why? Because I was told, David, you've got a year to make a profit, or we're shutting this down. The division hadn't made a profit in years. And so I came in and I said, well, one of the first things we're going to do is get rid of some of these extremely high value, low volume products. Now, we had some $100,000 optical disc jukeboxes, which don't exist anymore. They're electromechanical laser discs about this big. If you're into the LPs now, or you had LPs, they were the size of an LP, a long playing record, but they were laser discs. Imagine a CD the size of a record. And they were fairly heavy, and they went into a jukebox, and this jukebox did automatic data retrieval. And it was cool to watch because you get the arm and would pick it out and put it into the drive. And yes, there were drives that were big. You could read these things. They were $100,000, $200,000. I don't remember. Really expensive. So if you sold one, what happened? It was a decent chunk of revenue for the size of the business. And then you got to sell a large service contract. Well, though that was all great, but I think we had sold 5 the previous year, 2 the previous year, a very low volume. And I looked at it and said, wait a minute, this is costing us too much money to sell this. And the people who wanted to sell it, and I had a sales force, and if you've ever worked with salespeople, a lot of what you're trying to do, for me at least, my experience is deal with their psychology, and that they got what they wanted because they had to have a positive attitude to be able to go out and sell. And they came back and said, David, wait a minute, you're killing me. I love selling this thing. I know we only sold 2, but I've got like 10 more clients who are looking at it. Well, they've been looking at it for a couple of years. And so I said, okay, that's fine. I'm glad that there's opportunity, but let's talk about the cost. Cost number 1, salesperson's time. How much time did it take for you to be selling that niche product in small markets where you maybe had 1 or 2 clients? How much time does it take you compared to going out and selling a higher volume of other products to a broader marketplace? And it was obvious that became disproportionate amount of time to sell this product. That was number 1. Number 2, what did it take to ship and import, export that product from an operational perspective? And it was crazy because it was a one-off, or we sold 1 or 2 at a time, but the amount of paperwork and the amount of regulations and the amount of tracking that it took to import 1 or 2 was far and above more time and effort because we had never done it before to most countries. And so there's a whole process you've got to go through instead of just selling more of what you've got and growing the market of the products that are actually selling. And it wasn't like, well, wait a minute, we can seed the market, then it's going to grow. No, this was a very, very limited use. So the third cost was service and support. Service and support models are based on a certain amount of volume. And when you've got 1 product in a country, you need to have the tools, you have to have the materials, you have to have staff trained. And at the end of the day, I finally convinced everybody we were better off focusing on our core product line than these one-off products. And guess what? It made a huge difference. The loss in revenue was more than offset because, again, we had a certain amount of margin that we generated, and let's call it 20% margins. They were great margins. That was the other thing. If you had 100% margins, they don't exist. But if you had 95% margins, a whole different picture, but that wasn't the case. So when you looked at what we lost, let's call it $100,000 sale, but you didn't spend the salespeople time and they generated other opportunities. That was lost opportunity cost that we now recaptured. And we were able to stop spending the money on the operation side of things. And we ended up, and this was just one piece of a portfolio that we rearranged, and we managed the portfolio to make sure we were selling the right products into the right markets and not spending too much time on selling costs. That's what it comes down to. So those are the 2 topics for today. Let me go a little bit deeper into selling costs. So when I go into a company and I'm looking at what are they doing, what are they selling, what are their issues, part of it's the cost of selling. And I've done this with salespeople before as well. High performing versus low performing salespeople. Now, high-performing salespeople to some of you, what might come up is like, high-performing salespeople sell a lot. And I go, well, to me, that's not a high-performing salesperson. To me, a high-performing salesperson is a salesperson who generates more profit margin than anybody else. And understanding what they're selling, who they're selling to, and how they're generating such high product margins. I was just doing a case study yesterday with our mastermind, and we very quickly looked at an analysis of margin, and the person who sold the most did not contribute the most gross margin dollars to the company. Let's say they sold $100,000 and they only, well, let's start with a different number. They sold $200,000 and they contributed, let's call it $50,000 to the company in gross margin dollars, which would make it 25% gross 25% margins, which is okay for that company. It was average, but they sold the most. Yay, hero! And that was the case. When I walked into that client, that was the hero salesperson. But then we did some analysis, and the person with the best contribution, let's say they sold 150,000. Whoa, wait a minute. That is 25% less sales. That's not good. They should be selling more. Okay, great. But let's then do the product analysis, the margin analysis, and it ends up that they contributed $75,000 in gross margin on less sales. And that's a 50% gross margin. Wow, that's fantastic, right? That's what you're looking for as a business owner, as somebody, if you're working with business owners, you should be looking for profit margin contribution. So you have money to spend to pay people, to pay the lights, to pay everybody's payroll, the operation staff, and have profit left over at the end of the day, cash in the bank for you to grow and or pay your investors, pay the business owner. So let's take a third scenario with that. The third scenario is the person who has really high margins and from a percentage standpoint, but doesn't sell that much. So let's take the person who sells, let's call it, hold on a second, I've got to figure out let's just call it $10,000. So to make it easy for this example, they sell $10,000, but they have 80% margins. Wow. Well, but that's only $8,000, which is well below any other metric. And there was a salesperson who sold very little, had very high margins. Well, but that salesperson also happened to be, that wasn't their core, that wasn't their job responsibility. It was miscellaneous sales that they helped out with. So the sales were given to them. And there was one person, I think it was 79% margins, but it was on $20,000 in sales. So it was negligible, the contribution. And then we also had a discussion about, well, why is that person taking away from the core? And why aren't we sending those sales to the salespeople? But that's a different discussion for a different day. Today, the issue is you're looking for your high margin products and selling costs. And selling costs are directly related to margins and how much margin you're getting out of it. Because what's one of the biggest costs of sales? It's the salaries, it's the commissions, it's the what you're paying the people to go sell. In this case, there were outbound salespeople, so there was travel costs involved, etc. So I could go on and on. Other ideas are popping up into my head, but that'll have to wait till another day because we are about out of time. So let's recap on what we talked about today. Number one is that Product margins are important, and you should analyze them to figure out, are you pricing properly? And again, this is a topic for another day, but think about also the product margins. Are you losing money on some? Get rid of them. Are you making a lot of money on some? Well, how do you promote those, which directly relate to the selling costs? Is, well, how much is it costing you to sell something? Does it offset that cost? The benefit of selling it offset the cost, or is it marginal? And would you be better off focusing in on other products? So those are the two basic concepts I covered. Please leave me your questions. I'd love for you to help me understand what else you want to learn. I'm going to be here every Wednesday morning, 9 a.m. Eastern Time. And remember, cash creates financial clarity and confidence. So have a good day, and I'll see you next week. Take care.